Well, good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm the CEO of Petro Matad. I've been in post for a couple of years now. And I will assume that some of you know something about the company and some don't. So hopefully, in making a compromise of how much information I give you, I won't completely screw that up. This little map on the title slide shows you where Mongolia is. When my wife said to me, let's go on holiday to Mongolia, before I ever thought of taking a job there, I wasn't actually sure it was a country. I thought it might be part of China, but indeed it is an independent country stuck between China to the south and Russia to the north. It doesn't bound any other country, almost Kazakhstan, but not quite. And it's a very, very long way from the sea. So seriously landlocked, very large, and as you will see, quite unexplored so far. So in terms of who Petro Matad, who the company is, we were AIM listed in 2008, so long before my time. The first idea for the company came from a company in Mongolia called Petrovis, who is the largest distributor of gasoline in the country. So they have many service stations all over Mongolia, a very well-known local company. And they thought, wouldn't it be a good idea to get some acreage, nobody else seemed to be taking any, and go and explore for domestic hydrocarbons and then be able to refine and distribute domestically produced, domestically refined product. They've shown a remarkable degree of perseverance and patience, actually, because that was back in 2006 when they formed the company. 2008 it was listed, and 2019 it finally made a discovery that looks like it might be commercial. So 2020, the idea is to try and actually produce some revenue. I think if you told Petrovis that at the start, they might have said, woo, maybe we won't do that upstream bit. But there we are. We have on our board two members of Petrovis. Enkma is the chairperson, and Shine is a non-executive director. We also have Tim Bushell as a non-exec, who you may know from his time in Falklands Oil and Gas. I joined the company, as I said, two years ago. I'd worked with Tim some years ago in Lasmo. And John Henriksen, the Chief Financial Officer, has been in the company for 7 years. This is the third time that John and I have worked together. So we've got some familiarity amongst us on the board and some experience of finding oil and gas and trying to commercialize it. Now, in terms of why we're in Mongolia at all, this map summarizes, at least in schematic form, what happens when a country doesn't explore for its hydrocarbons when the rest of the world is doing so. So Mongolia, for most of the 20th century, was a satellite of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union didn't explore for oil in Mongolia, had no need to, had no reason to. It had plenty of oil close to its population centers further to the west. The only oil field that they developed was a very small surface anticline that was seeping oil at surface, so it wasn't great exploration that led them to it, but they did that for military reasons in case they had a war with China. So that field has been in production since the 40s and is still in production now, but it hasn't produced very much. That's in, that doesn't seem to work. Let's try it another way around. No, battery's flat. So anyway, it's in the East Gobi Basin in the southeast of the country. And then when the Soviet Union fell and companies like BP sent their geologists, thank you. Which one, the red one? Yeah, just the top. Thanks. Okay, so that's where that Soviet field is. So when the Soviet Union fell, BP and some other big boys sent in their geologists. They looked at the petroleum systems that could be present in these yellow basins, these undrilled basins in Mongolia, and noted that it was exactly the same geology as the basins of northern China. And China was exploring its own basins through the 20th century, finding multi-billion barrel accumulations and starting to produce. Those fields are now in decline. But Mongolia didn't get that kind of exploration attention. And even then, in the mid-90s, BP and others didn't rush in because, as I said, landlocked country stuck between two global superpowers. If you find something, who's going to buy it and how much they're going to pay? So that was a problem that kept everybody I think, shy. The only people that had the steel to go after this was SOCO. SOCO moved in to this area of Mongolia, an extension of the Hilar-Tamsag basin from China. So they followed the geology in there, they drilled some wells, they found some oil, they put it on stream at a relatively low rate, and then in 2005 they sold that asset to PetroChina. And PetroChina came in and drilled many hundreds of wells, got the production up to 25,000 barrels a day, and they are still the major producer in Mongolia. So 95% of Mongolia's current production comes from those fields. The rest comes from the CNOC-operated old Soviet field here. All of that oil is exported to China as crude and is refined in China, and nothing comes back as product. Mongolia has to buy product from Russia, and therefore the Russians have a monopoly, and so the price is high. The Mongolian government would like nothing more than some energy independence in terms of oil and gas, so it has tried to incentivize people to come in by offering good fiscal terms. It can't do anything about its geography, though, and I think what some of the big boys have been waiting for is somebody to make a big discovery or to have a big flow rate and to attract some attention. The only company that's been active in exploration over the last couple of years is Petro Matad. We are a small cap company, so we obviously don't have the financial firepower to just go completely wild in the West and wildcat all over it and see what we can find. But we've done our best over the last 2 years to find some oil, and I'll just summarize where we've got to in the program that we have done. But before I do that, a little update on the oil industry itself. This is the production chart for Mongolia, peaking at 25,000 barrels a day or thereabouts in 2015, in decline now. That's the natural decline of the PetroChina fields. They claim to have some resource already discovered, not yet produced, but we're not sure that that is going to reverse this decline. It might decelerate it a little bit. But meanwhile, Mongolia has decided, as part of its energy independence, to build a refinery, which is going to be located here on the main rail and road link between the capital Ulaanbaatar and the Chinese border. They're building a refinery using a soft loan from the Indian Exim Bank of what was $1 billion, is now $1.3 billion, and they've actually started to spend that money. The feedstock required for that refinery is 30,000 barrels a day. So by the time it's ready in 3 or 4 years' time, PetroChina's production will probably be able to satisfy about half of that. So Mongolia really wants people to find some oil. And so they were delighted when we recently announced that we had found some. It's not all by itself going to fill the 50% requirement to get up to 30,000 barrel a day feedstock in one jump. But it has been viewed very positively by the government, and I'll talk you through that next. We did recently receive an award as the leading explorer in Mongolia, but that's from a field of one, so we can't really claim too much credit for that. So we raised money in 2018 to drill what we said was going to be a multi-well program of exploration wells. In 2018, at least early 2018, the market was open to the word exploration. Not sure it is now. We have now completed that program. We drilled 5 wells and we tested 1. We found oil in 2. We've registered 2 discoveries, 1 rather small, but the Heron discovery looks like it's going to be commercial, and it did deliver a good flow rate, and I'll talk you through that. The big wells we drilled in the west, one was pretty comprehensively dry. The other one had good oil shows within it, proving the petroleum system, but didn't have a commercial accumulation at that location. So let's have a look at what we were doing through 2019. And this was in Block 20, which is in the east of the country, immediately next door to where PetroChina produces its oil. So this is a map of Block 20, which is 10,000 square kilometers, which is quite a lot of acreage for a company of our market cap to try and explore. And when you add to it the 2 blocks of 50,000 square kilometers in the west, you can see that we did have our work cut out to decide where to drill within these huge blocks. But anyway, in Block 20, we'd identified basins with gravity data and with some seismic, and we drilled 3 wells in 2019. Red Deer number 1 was the first ever well drilled in this basin, which is called the Asgat Sag. We found quite good oil shows in the well, but no commercial accumulation. It does highlight that there may be some more potential down here. We drilled Heron 1 and then Gazelle 1 right up in the north, adjacent to the producing fields of PetroChina's Block 19. Now, our exploration period for Block 20 actually ends in July of 2020. So these wells were being drilled in the final year of the exploration term. Under the petroleum law, there are no more extensions that can be requested for the exploration period. So the only way to hold acreage beyond July of next year is through the granting of an exploitation license. And to do that, you have to find something. So our work was cut out to do that. So with Heron, Heron was our best chance of success because we shamelessly located it as close to somebody else's oil field as we could possibly get it. So here in Block 19, this is the block boundary between PetroChina's Block 19 to the north and our Block 20 to the south. In here, there's a field called 1946. This part of the field has been developed over the years. These wells were drilled about 10 years ago. They've had a couple of, as far as we can tell, a couple of appraisal/development wells drilled, but never put into commercial production. We think that was because they didn't want to let on to us that there was actually an oil field that they mapped as extending into our block, hoped that we'd finally give up and they could just have it for free. So we drilled Heron here as an appraisal of this overall structure, and it came in and proved that indeed this is one structure, a total oil field area of about 21 square kilometers, 62% of which lies on our block, and the structural crest is also on our block. We assessed pre-drill that there was probably 25 million barrels of recoverable resource in the Heron structure on the Block 20 acreage. That's using parameters that PetroChina are able to sustain in their block to the north, which includes things like a 15% recovery factor. We hope we'll do better than that. And we did get a good test result that suggested that indeed we may have been a little bit conservative. But 25 million barrels will be very, very commercial in this area. The well itself flowed at, excuse me, I'm just getting a little bit of a tickle. The well itself flowed on DST at an initial production rate of 821 barrels a day, which is about the third best well in the basin. And so we were very pleased with that. It also flowed to surface naturally, which many of these wells do not. So that was a good result, but it is only an initial production rate. We were only able to test for about 2.5 days. So the sustainability of that production still needs to be determined, but a very good result. And we've also mapped within the area we hope to retain as our exploitation license a number of structures that have resource potential of 50 to 85 million barrels. So this could be a very good exploitation license to have. And we have the rapid commercialization potential of Heron. It is located here in Block 20, 20 kilometers to the south of PetroChina's facilities. PetroChina have already said they will welcome us in, and we will be looking to do a commercial negotiation with them over the next few months to see what kind of terms they would offer for us to put our oil through their infrastructure. We will also be producing the Mongolian government share of production from Block 20, so we expect the Mongolian government to be on our side in that negotiation. So in terms of the provisional work program for 2020, this is a very different work program to the ones that Petro Matad would have had for all its previous years, where we were solely focused on exploration. Here, our primary goal right now is to secure that exploitation license. We've shown it on here taking until the end of the first quarter. I've told the government I'd like it before the end of the year. They didn't throw me out, but they did have a look on their face like, you're joking, right? I would be satisfied with the end of the first quarter because in parallel we are already doing the permitting that is needed in Mongolia to be able to put this field into production. And then our plan would be, I don't want 2020 to be a wasted year, our plan would be to get Heron 1 on production by the middle of 2020 and to start earning some revenue, finally, and also to be able to drill Heron 2, Heron 3 and Heron 4 on locations we've already chosen based on the 3D seismic that we have in this area, good quality, and therefore easy to define these appraisal locations. So that would be our provisional work program for 2020, focusing for the first time in the company's history on getting some revenue generated. Now, in terms of the value of what we found, if this really is 25 million barrels, if it was in the hands of PetroChina, they would apply their usual parameters, say, oh, 25 million barrels, we recover about 300,000 barrels per well. We'll need about 60 wells, but we can drill them for $1 million each. The NPV 10 of that is about $150 million. It shouldn't have BO on the end there, sorry, with a rate of return of 36%. That is perhaps how PetroChina might value this. And that's good, and I'm going to push that, because when we go to talk to PetroChina about the possibility of using their facilities, we expect also to be talking about the possibility of partnering. They've already offered their services to us because they reckon they can drill cheaper than anybody else, and I think they're right. But what we would say to them is, hey, why don't you farm in? Why don't you pay something for a working interest in this, bearing in mind that what we've found is already quite valuable, and there's that upside that's 2 or 3 times the size that you shouldn't forget about. Now, there is a good possibility that PetroChina may want to join in here from the things they've said in the past, but we have also looked at the possibility of a self-sustaining early production system that we could fund ourselves without the need for a big equity injection. We'd need a little bit of kickstart money, $10 to $15 million that we currently don't have. That $35 million we raised last year, we've spent, by the end of this year, we'll have spent all but 3. So we have enough money to run the company to get ourselves the exploitation license and actually to put Heron 1 on stream. But with this injection of capital, we'd be able to get that well on stream, get Heron 2 drilled and on stream, Heron 3 drilled and on stream. Because of the favourable fiscal terms here, we're able to pay for our office overhead and all our production and operating needs with around about $3 to $3.5 million for a year of operation. And for that, if we're producing 350 barrels a day, then we would be able to cover our overhead. And if we've got 4 wells on production, each doing somewhere around 300 barrels a day, we're producing 1,200 barrels a day, we're actually making quite a bit of money. So it becomes cash positive quite quickly in year 2, and that would enable us to drill more wells without having to raise any more than this $10 to $15 million. And for that $10 to $15 million, I don't really want to do it as equity. It probably wouldn't be that easy at the moment. We're talking to the Mongolian banks about the possibility of debt financing for some of this. It's a little bit too premature for the international banks, and it's also in Mongolia, and so they'd have to overcome their concerns about country entry. The Mongolian banks don't have that problem, and they're very keen to see indigenous Mongolian production brought on stream. So we're having that conversation. We've also spoken to logistics companies that are involved in the mining industry in Mongolia. These guys would pay advance payments for a long contract as the off-taker. One of them that we've spoken to, they would like to transport the oil to Russia, which is something new. And so we could get some money from them to finance the kickstart of the early production system. So this wouldn't all have to come from basically from shareholders as an equity raise, and that's what we're focusing on. The possibility to become cash positive as quickly as we can, generate some disposable revenue, develop the field. It doesn't maximize the NPV of the asset. Doing it the way PetroChina would probably does that, but actually from a shareholder point of view, doing it that way is probably better in terms of what it would do for the share price. And we are also looking in parallel with all this at refreshing our exploration thesis for Mongolia, which is the thing that we've been doing for so long. We're talking to some of the big Western companies that are actually actively exploring around the world and using their own balance sheet to do it, because those areas of Western Mongolia are so large and the blocks are so large, you actually do need quite a lot of financial firepower to be able to do the job properly. I believe that there is commercially recoverable hydrocarbons in quite large quantities in Western Mongolia. It just needs somebody with that amount of financial firepower to get after it. So if we could introduce one of the big boys as a partner of ours to come in and largely fund that program, they could get, for a $75 million exploration investment, they could get high resolution gravity, they could get a lot of seismic, including 3D, and we could probably drill 6 wells. Whereas, currently they're spending $75 million on 1 well offshore. So being the last remaining onshore frontier, we think may be attractive to some of these guys. In the farm outs we've done over the last few years, or attempted to do, there has been some interest from the big boys. I think technically some of those companies believe in the possibility of Western Mongolia and its upside, and we're offering them a way of a soft country entry in that we will be their operator and they will be our joint venture partner. So that kind of restocks the exploration hopper for us if we're able to do it, and we're trying to have those discussions right now. Meanwhile, we still hold 2 blocks in Western Mongolia, and we haven't given up on the potential of those, although we did drill 1 well in each block last year. This was one of those wells. This is Snow Leopard number 1, which was drilled in block 5 in western central Mongolia. This well found had oil in the mud, and quite a lot of oil in the mud when it was drilling through shales, proving a working petroleum system in the basin. But unfortunately, the sandstone reservoirs that we were chasing, one of them was not there. The deeper one was present, but didn't have any oil in it. The oil play fairway seems to be shallower in the basin. We like this basin because we've proved the petroleum system, and that's this one here, the Tats Basin, and that's where Snow Leopard was located. And we have some shallower prospects just to the south on what we call the Raptor Trend, 3 or possibly 4 culminations, anticlines, that we could drill with a small rig at very low cost, and we would like to do that. And over here there's a similar basin, the Tugrug Basin, in which we have a 3D seismic survey that has identified the Fox prospect that we identified a couple of years ago. Now we have a shallow 4-way dip closure over the top of Fox, which we could reach with a small rig. And we have the Phoenix prospect, or a cluster of prospects in this area. Velociraptor, which would be the main target down here, has 200 million barrels of resource potential. Phoenix has 230. Fox Shallow has about 40. So there's 500 million barrels in 3 individual features over here. But this is wildcat exploration. I'd like to do it cheaply, and I'd prefer to do it with revenue that we had earned rather than had to raise. So we are talking to the government about buying ourselves a little bit more time on Block 5 to keep it in the portfolio. So the conclusions, I don't need to go through all of these, but we've completed our program. We've made a discovery. We're looking to get that on stream as quickly as possible. We're looking to use revenue from that to fund the further development of that field, or we'll partner with PetroChina or some other third parties that we are likely to talk to. And we have not yet given up on the wildcat exploration, but we would like to do that for a long period in partnership with companies that don't need to raise equity every time they want to drill a well. So with that, I will close. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the final frontier, probably more Star Trek than Thunderbirds, we talked about earlier. Questions then, we've got time for a couple. Yes, got one over there.
Thanks, Mike. Interesting presentation. Congratulations on the Heron 1 discovery.
Thank you.
My question is, there was never any requirement to unitize, because it's clearly one field.
Yeah. There is a unitization regulation in Mongolia, and the Mongolians in 2016 tried to impose it on PetroChina. There's another feature that crosses the block boundary with our block, a feature called 1962. So the authorities shut down PetroChina's production and said, go and unitize it with Petro Matad. So data was swapped, meetings were had, and then PetroChina said exactly what I would say: prove it, prove that you've got some, and then we can talk, because we hadn't drilled our side of that feature. Here we have drilled our side of the feature now, and I think we've proven pretty conclusively that it is the same feature. But what Mongolia realized whilst it was having the conversation on the other field was we don't want to shut it down because that stops our revenue. So they came up with the pragmatic solution of nobody can drill within 250 meters of the block boundary. So long as you don't do that, you can carry on, you can drill, you can produce, and get on with unitizing later.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, question in the back. Oh, I thought there was. Okay, let me just ask you, you mentioned obviously the location here, Russia, we know about Russia's proclivities sometimes for interfering in countries. Just briefly, who runs Mongolia and where do China and Russia make their influence felt, and could that ever upset your plans?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think Mongolia is now a pretty stable republic and has got, 20 plus years behind it. But it started its life very, very Russia focused, because actually the Mongolians to some extent missed the Russians. They reckon that the Russians did a good thing and organized lots of stuff, and when they said they were going to do something, they did something. But they've become, as a country, a lot more China focused, because most of their trade is now with China. The Mongolians as a race don't particularly like the Chinese, and it seems to be mutual, but they've become their major trading partner. So whilst the older generation of Mongolians speak Russian as a second language, the younger generation speak Chinese. So it's a little bit of a schizophrenic relationship that they're having at the moment. But in terms of the overall governmental relations between the countries, they do seem to be quite close. They have good ties. There doesn't seem to be that much in the way of interference. We talked to the Mongolians, the amount of Chinese interference over the years has been just terrible. Now it's just gradually taking over absolutely every piece of business that they do. They don't really like the idea that the oil industry seems to be entirely in the hands of the Chinese. So the fact that we, a Mongolian company, as Mongolia looks upon us, has made a discovery, that's really quite positive for them. But no, I don't think on a super global scale, no, I don't see a threat.
Great, thank you. Any more questions? Just one here.
It's a very brief question. I think you mentioned that you actually expecting 2020. I think you said the second half. You expecting a production. So in terms of how say confident are you in terms of things coming on stream, whereby the returns will be able to run some of the other wells, so that you don't need someone to come on site? What's the percentage sort of?
I think the risk around delay to starting up the production on Heron 1 and finding out what it will do on a sustainable basis, that just comes down to the speed with which we can get the exploitation license. Mongolia hasn't awarded one for many years because nobody's asked for one for many years. Nobody's made a discovery for many years. So it's actually just making sure that bureaucracy can move. So we're trying to use the euphoria and the momentum we've got behind the Mongolian company right now to get the government moving to say, until we've got tenure to that land, there's nothing really we can do apart from permitting. So please give us that quickly. So I think that's my main question mark, but I've asked them to do it quickly, and all indications are that they are going to do so. In terms of putting one well on stream and using the revenue from that to fund the next well and the next well, that would be quite slow. That's why we need 10 to 15 million to get the thing moving. I don't want to do it all through equity, but we need that to get things moving. That way the cash pile builds faster and could finance a development drilling campaign every year. But if it was just coming from the one well, that well would have to be highly productive for a long time, and even then it would be a slow build-up of cash.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.